CD's office hours for
This meeting is being recorded.
ESG and ESGCB. My name is Taylor Bilbrey and I will be your moderator for today's office hours. We're going to hold for just a minute for more of our colleagues to join us for today's session. In the meantime, I want to invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and the region you represent. We will get started soon. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESGCV. My name is Taylor Bilbrey and I will be today's moderator. If you're just joining us, please go ahead and put your name and the region you represent in the chat. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded for public record. Office hours recordings are on the HCD ESG webpage under Technical Assistance and Training. A copy of this slide deck and the recording will also be emailed to you by your grant administrator or your annual rep. Next slide, please. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box, and the team will read your questions out loud at the end of the presentation and provide answers if possible throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered into the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESGCV grant admins, and other consultants who are able to answer your questions. Next slide, please. For our agenda today, we have some ESG and ESGCV updates, some office hour updates, some upcoming training announcements. We will have time for ESG and ESGCV question and answer, and we have a spotlight series presentation on personal identifiable information policies. Next slide. All right, I will hand it over to Sarah for some ESG updates.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have much today. Just wanted to touch base on the 2021 ESG contracts, standard agreements. Please remember to upload your signed copy of the 213 prior to accepting the award. We do still have about 12 people that we are waiting on 213s for signature. The rest are still routing through our internal process, but those should be done here pretty soon. If you have been awarded homelessness prevention funding and you have not turned in your updated policies and procedures for us to review and approve, do not forget to do so. Remember, we will not reimburse for any HP expenses until this process has been completed. Avoid recapture. 20% expenditure milestone deadline is 120 days from the execution date of your contract. We have quite a few administrative entities that are due anytime between tomorrow and the 10th of October. So please make sure that you are getting your RFFs into eCivis. If your contract has been executed and you need help navigating the system to complete the RFFs or to add additional people to your agency to manage the contracts, please reach out to us at esgnova@hcd.ca.gov. And of course, we will provide TA to you. Remember that all contract information for 2021 and moving forward is within the eCivis system. So you will need to upload your RFF request and your detailed expense report, along with all of the information that you have to type in for what you're requesting dollar amounts for. Next slide, please. Avoid receiving the STD 209s and, of course, reimbursement delays. I've already gone over that all the contracts are managed in eCivis. Do not email your requests to your representative. We will not process this, and everything has to go through the system. Remember, it does have to include the completed detailed expense report. We will also conduct the mini monitoring for every single reimbursement request. This will include anywhere from 3 to 4 line items chosen by your HCD rep, and may also include complete client files moving forward. Remember that when you are requested to submit your mini monitoring backup documentation, it all has to be redacted and submitted through the secure SharePoint site, not uploaded in eCivis. That is also noted in HCD's PII policy. Be sure to have your supporting documentation ready and to submit when requested from your HCD representative. Next slide, please. 2022 applications are still being reviewed. We expect to have these completed by November and still to announce the awards in December. If you have only turned in a draft resolution and now have your executed signed resolution, please reach out to esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov with that and attach the completed resolution in that email so that one of us can attach it to your application and complete the process out. Remember that until we get the executed signed resolution, we cannot move forward with your application with the award process. Reminder, you cannot add additional persons from your organization to view the application or pending award until a contract has been executed. I have received multiple emails in regards to this, and I go over this every week. eCivis is very specific. The person that signed up with the account to complete the application is the only person that will have access to the award until the contract is executed. Next slide, please. And of course, our ESG policy documents, rapid rehousing policy, coming soon, if it's not already posted as of this morning. Make sure, if you have not done so already, to check out each one of the policies, read them. Remember, we will be asking for updated policies and procedures and written standards in regards to your agency as these get posted. Next slide, please. And of course, ESG team representatives. We have Diana Prado, Giovanni Martinez, Tuesday Cool, Sam Liu, and Anthony Zapita. Please reach out to your ESG representative listed above, or you can, of course, contact us at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I have just a few ESGCV updates. California received approximately $3.8 million in reallocated ESGCV funding. HCD management is currently looking at options for distribution. So we will keep you all updated on that process. Next slide, please. And we have a few office hour updates. So some of our upcoming topics are housing problem solving, match clinic office hours, shared housing, and youth homelessness. We also have an announcement. All requests for HCD for certifications of consistency with consolidated plan should be sent to Alex Navarro, and we have that email listed for you. We may be able to get someone to drop that in the chat if needed. Our training site to register is linked here, and our office hour recordings are linked below, and we'll have somebody to drop those links in the chat shortly. Next slide. I will highlight a few of our upcoming trainings for October. On October 3rd from 9 a.m. to 9:45, we have Coffee and Calculators, HUD Calculator Demonstration. Join us for a short training to learn about HUD CPD Income Eligibility Calculator, including the proper way to enter data and use the tool. We will perform a live demonstration during the session so that participants can see the calculator's functionality in real time. And we will have those links for you in the chat shortly too. Next slide, please. And we have some COVID response resources. As always, the slides will be sent out. So if you want to link those when those are sent out, if you want to catch those links when the slides are sent out later this week, feel free. Next slide, please. We also have some monkeypox resources linked here in the slides. Next slide, please. Along with other ESG resource links here embedded within the slides. Next slide. We will pause for just a moment for any questions about the first portion of our session. I see our chat is quite active today. So if anyone had questions, I'll take a look through the chat before we move on. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. If we want to go to the next slide. All right, as always, you can contact us with further questions. For annual ESG, please use the email address listed, and for ESG-CV, you can always reach out to your grant administrator. Next slide. All right, I will now hand it over to Gordon Levine for today's Spotlight series.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Gordon Levine. My pronouns are he and him, and I am white and Jewish, and I'm a lead homeless services specialist with ICF. I'd like to invite my co-presenter, Chris Pitcher, to introduce himself at this time.
Morning, everybody. Chris Pitcher, he, him, his, here in Denver, Colorado. ESG CV Training and Technical Assistance Lead for California HCD. Glad to be here with you.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Let's go ahead and dive into our personally identifiable information policy training. Let's have a look first at our general requirements. Next slide, please. All right, the ESG program interim rule, which is 24 CFR 576, requires California HCD, its subrecipients, and its sub-subrecipients, which means anybody under its subrecipients, which means anybody who gets ESG funding for any reason, to ensure the following: that all records containing PII, which again stands for personally identifiable information, of any person or family who applies for and or receives ESG assistance will be kept secure and confidential. That the address or location of any domestic violence survivor, and domestic violence here includes dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. The address or location of any project, any shelter project assisted with ESG that serves that population will not be made public except with the written authorization of the person responsible for the operations of that shelter. And finally, that the address or location of any housing of a program participant of any ESG project will not be made public except as provided under a pre-existing privacy policy of the recipient, which is HCD, or the subrecipient, and in a way that is consistent with your state and local laws regarding privacy and obligations of confidentiality, which is a mouthful and generally means you should not disclose the address or location or of participant housing. Next slide, please. So recipients, again, this is HCD, and subrecipients, which means anybody who's getting ESG money from HCD, must develop confidentiality policies and procedures in writing to keep confidential every ESG applicant or participant. So that's anyone applying for ESG assistance or receiving it. The PII for any of those folks that they receive for any reason, including housing locations and addresses, as well as the locations and addresses of any domestic violence shelters. Just reiterating where we were at before, these are things that need to be kept confidential, sort of above and beyond what you would necessarily consider. Next slide, please. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Gordon. And just to add a little bit of context to the introduction to this session, the reason PII is so important is not only to protect clients, which is exactly what we want to do, but we also have findings from HUD around releasing PII, not only at the California HCD level, but other levels as well. So this really came about from some HUD findings that said we need to tighten up something. And this is a reflection of the written policy of California HCD, which if you go back to Sarah's slides, when you get these slides, she has that listed where it is in the California HCD website. So you can download the policy yourself and look at it. But let's continue to build our understanding of PII, so personally identifiable information, sometimes called personally protected information, or PPI. It's generally pretty much the same thing. You see here that the PII is defined by OMB as information which can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity, such as their name, social security number, biometric records, alone or when combined with other personal identifying information, which is linked or linkable to a specific individual. You see some examples here on the chart. When alone, names. We know that names can be very identifiable. That's how we call ourselves. You heard me identify myself at the beginning of this slide by my names, social security number, driver's license number, and so on. But also when combined, date of birth and place of birth. So especially in the smaller of our communities, just little pieces of information like this can very much identify us. Race and ethnicity can do that as well in some of our smaller communities. So be very careful about combining small pieces of data that in and of themselves might look innocuous, but together are not. Next slide. Okay, defining the last term we're going to define today, and that is sensitive personally identifiable information, or SPII. This is defined in HUD's protecting PII document, capacity building guidance on protecting privacy information. PII that when lost, compromised, or disclosed could substantially harm individual. Social security numbers, medical records, credit information, banking information, immigration status, criminal records, and any information related to domestic violence. That should always be very sensitive. So we want to note that there's a little bit different definition for this. Next slide, and back to you, Gordon.
All right, thank you. So fundamentally, there is no comprehensive list of every piece of information that is or really could be PII or SPII. Instead, recipients and subrecipients, which again means HCD and all of y'all, have to assess each participant record to determine whether it contains information that either alone or when combined with other information in the record constitutes PII or SPII. And what I would add to that is that this is a better safe than sorry situation. Generally speaking, if you are not sure whether something constitutes PII or SPII, you should probably treat it as though it does until you are proven otherwise. It's always better to be a little bit more vigilant than a little bit less vigilant when it comes to sensitive information. Next slide, please. All right, again, PII is PII no matter where it's located, how you store it, or how well you secure it. And I see Chris smiling because secure it is always a topic of interest here. Recipients and subrecipients have to assess each ESG program record that they generate or receive to determine whether they contain PII. And an ESG program record can be all sorts of different things, things that we often don't think of, such as emails, for example, is an ESG program record. Faxes received, if you still have a fax machine in 2022. You can find PII in all sorts of unexpected places, but really anything associated with client data could in theory be a program record that contains PII. And it keeps being PII no matter how well you store it. And we're smiling a little bit about storage because this is sort of a constant struggle. You could bury PII at the bottom of a volcano and it would still be PII. And it could be just sitting out on your desk and it's PII. And those are equally PII. How well you secure it does not make it less identifiable. It doesn't make it less personal. It doesn't make it less sort of intimate and problematic if it's released. And on the topic of securing, and we're going to talk about this more later, but there is a big difference between having a good system for securing PII and actually using that system. I think all of us at some point in our careers have had lockable filing cabinets, and there's a big difference between a lockable and a locked filing cabinet. And recognizing the difference between the two and acting on that difference is critical to protecting PII. Next slide. So protecting PII, subrecipients, this is, by the way, is in bright red because we really want you to pay attention to it. Subrecipients, which means y'all, are required by HCD policy to develop policies and procedures for protecting PII, which means that you need to sit down, think about, and put in writing what you're going to do to protect your client's PII, whether it is whether it is a physical record, like a piece of paper or an envelope or a client file, and or an electronic record that's kept in HMIS, or that exists in your email inbox, or that exists in Google Drive or anywhere else that you might store information. But on the other hand, confidentiality protections do not apply to either HCD or subrecipient, y'all, staff. Staff information, which includes names and salaries, is commonly shared between recipients and subrecipients, including during the grant application, contracting, and reimbursement request processes. And what we want you to hear from that is when you are submitting, for example, requests for reimbursements, there is an expectation that if there is PII involved in those, for example, client names associated with housing payments, you need to redact those client names. But if there is staff names on there, there's no reason to redact staff names, because your name as a staff person who is funded by ESG is not PII. It's not confidential, and is in fact a matter of public record. Next slide, please. Can we get the next slide? Thank you. Back over to you, Chris Pitcher.
Thanks, Gordon. So we're going to lay out the next few slides that we're going to do here as an overall on what protecting PII looks like. So we're going to talk in specifics about all of these. I think one of the things that Gordon just said that made me chuckle is having a locked filing cabinet versus a lockable filing cabinet. I have two filing cabinets in front of me that contain all of my tax information. There's a key in that lock. I never removed that key. That is what we're talking about with that, and protecting information. I'll also say that when we think about PII, we think about data in our HMIS, data that we have other places. HMIS is often very protected. But as soon as we take that information out of HMIS, print it, do something else, that's where protecting physical files becomes much more important, and really protecting all of our PII printed. That's where things are likely, if at all, to break down, without breakdown. Your data systems themselves are generally very secure. We don't have to worry about that too much. So when we're thinking about protecting our PII, we are often the most at risk once we take it out of an electronic system and have it printed. So we'll go through all these from limited collection all the way down to respond to data breaches. So let's go to the next slide and jump right in. All right, limit collection. This is easy. Do not collect information that you do not need. This is a very simple process. If you don't need that PII, don't ask for it. If it's not to meet a requirement or for some other purpose that is valid, don't do it. When you collect PII, only collect collect the information that you need and that you're authorized to have. So that is either something that you are asked for organizationally, that you are required for your supervisor or organization, something that a state requires of you, or written standards, or organizational obligations, such as the contract with HCD, where they require you to collect name, social number, date of birth for every person served through ESG and ESG-CV. So limiting your collection is a very good way to reduce the amount of PII you have to protect, because once you have it, you have no choice but to protect it. Next slide.
I think that's back over to me. So protecting. Sorry, if we could go back a slide. I think we missed one, and it's a good one too. All right, very good. Protecting PII. So we need to manage access. Fundamentally, the principle here is only sharing or discussing PII on a need-to-know basis. The sort of obvious version of this is like you wouldn't walk up to a stranger on the street and be like, hey, want to know about a client that I served today? Like you would never do that. That sounds like that's way beyond the pale. But there are more sort of subtle ways that you would share or discuss PII that might not trigger it, such as with people who are inside your organization but outside your department who would have no reason to need that information, or people with partner organizations who might in theory be working with the participant but might not have a disclosure of information, your family members if you've had a bad day and you're letting off steam about a client, and so on and so on. So that really informs everything else on this slide. Don't share or release PII without authorization. Authorization should always be in writing because you want to be able to point back to it later if you need it. Before you discuss PII over the telephone or a video call like this, confirm that you're speaking to the right person and inform them that the conversation will include PII. It sounds a little bit silly, but if you can't see the person, you're not sure who you're talking to, and informing them that the conversation will include PII is part of protecting them. It's also part of protecting you. You should avoid discussing PII if there are people around who aren't authorized to hear it. This is especially important in office situations where people might be wandering in and out, who might be from different departments or from like wildly different organizational operations. I think especially of like HCD, which is a very large organization. ESG is a small part of a very large organization, and there's no reason that people from HCD's legal department should have access to ESG client information unless they need that, just because they happen to be wandering through that floor of the building. So that's really what we're talking about. Same thing with holding meetings where PII might be discussed in secure spaces. Just close the door to the conference room. Not a big ask, just close the door to the conference room. Treat meeting minutes and notes as confidential until and unless you can verify that they don't contain PII. The big one here is if you're taking notes about participants in meetings, don't include names, use HMIS ID numbers, for example. For meetings that do include PII, you should really record their date, time, place, subject, chair, and attendees, which sounds like a lot, but really it's just putting the normal information that you would include on any meeting notes at the top of the thing. When did it happen? And who was there and who was in charge of the meeting? And these final three are going to be like slap your forehead things, but you would be shocked at the number of times that I've had to remind people about this. Do not leave PII in a voicemail. Do not call someone and say, hi, this message is for John Doe. Your homeless services rapid rehousing bed is ready at Acme Corporation. Please call us back at blah, blah, blah. Don't leave that voicemail, please. Definitely don't text that voicemail. Absolutely don't do that. Phone numbers change and you don't know who's on the other end. And don't send PII via unencrypted email or between email servers that don't share security protocols. This one's a little trickier. You really want to talk to your IT department about making sure that you know whether your email server is secure and what secure point-to-point security would look like for you. Likely security is in place between you and HCD, though not necessarily. Between other providers, it's on a case-by-case basis. The other thing that I would add to that I'm seeing more often is please, I beg you, interpret do not text PII to mean don't put PII in any text message across any format that you're sending to anybody. Please do not Snapchat PII. Please don't put it in a TikTok. Please don't put it in a Facebook message. Please don't tweet PII. Even if you're direct messaging the person, and I know that there are communities that use social media, for example, to stay in contact with their participants who do not have access to phones, but will absolutely keep up with Facebook Messenger or whatever. Treat it like text, don't put PII in there. And if you absolutely must contact participants using that information, be very careful and sensitive about what you include in those messages. Next slide, back over to you, Mr. Christopher Pisser.
Thank you, Gordon. And this leads into one of my biggest messages for the day is that most of us are working from home. And now that we work from home, we need to protect physical files at home too. So any PII that you collect that you would protect in your office, Well, you need to protect those at your home office too. As I mentioned, the lockable filing cabinets in my office are not locked, but if you open them up, you can see my tax information, meaning my social security number and everything. So I'm not doing a very good job of protecting my own PII. I need to do much better than that, and you need to consider that as well. So when we talk about physical files, again, this is where I consider this the biggest risk. Make sure that we clearly label any file that has any PII, lock those storage containers, filing cabinets, whatever you have, lock them, take the key out, and make sure the key isn't easily findable. Oftentimes we'll take the key out and just set it in our desk, as I just did there in pantomime. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we have less opportunity for disclosure. Never leave PII in open areas. So even though I'm in my home office, you'll see that my computer screen faces a wall, so you can't see over my shoulder any PII from my computer screen, nor do I leave anything out that would contain PII. Yeah, don't access any records containing PII except in places you need to, in work areas that are secure. So again, if I had PII up on my screen right now, no one can see it. You walk into my office, I see you coming, and I can close that computer down and lock it up. Develop some centralized record where PII is stored that specifies how you'll periodically check that that storage is secure and those records are correct, and treat external digital media as the same as physical files. So I have a little jump drive here. Anything on that jump drive that is sensitive, I need to keep that as safe as I do in HMIS, or as safe as I do in my physical records protocols, and having those written down. Very important to protect that PII. Next slide, back to you, Gordon.
Thank you. So let's talk about protecting electronic files. As we said earlier, you are required by HCD to develop policies around PII. That includes developing a policy that specifies where files containing PII will be stored in your digital filing system, which includes information regarding when and how you will periodically check that PII is being stored in accordance with this policy. What we do not want to see is no policy, and what we don't want to see is a policy that says, we keep it in Bob's Google Drive, personal Google Drive on his Gmail account. That is not a good PII storage system. What we would be looking for is PII is stored on our server that we host, and or secured cloud storage that we have access to in this way. And we check that PII is being maintained there in the way that exists in this policy every 3 months. That's a healthy PII policy for your electronic file storage. In your electronic file storage, you should clearly distinguish between files that do and do not contain PII. You can do that in the file name. You can do that with a list of files that contain PII. You can have a folder system that delineates between PII and non-PII containing files. There's lots of different ways to do it. There are many parts of this presentation where you're going to start to think, gosh, I should really consult with my organization's IT experts because I don't know how to do this. We're going to say it a bunch. But anytime you get into an electronic thing in this presentation and think like, I don't know how to do this. Like I've only just now figured out Facebook Messenger. Talk to your IT professionals. They probably know exactly what you're looking for and can get you set up quick. Finally, as I just said, consult with your organization's IT experts to appropriately deploy security measures, such as file and digital media encryption, two-factor identification, limiting who can access files containing PII, and so on. And just a note on two-factor authentication, we have recently seen massive data breaches related to PII that are related to two-factor authentication phishing attacks. So that would be situations in which somebody poses as a legitimate, sends you a link that looks like a legitimate piece of two-factor authentication. You click the thing and then you've lost access to your username and password. And so someone gets access to your system as a result. I won't call out the organizations, they've been in the news, but the upshot of that is having strong two-factor authentication policies that are paired with knowing what your two-factor authentication looks like and when you should be receiving it is a healthy way to proceed there. Again, talk to your organization's IT folks. Next slide, and I think back over to you, Chris.
Yes, thank you. So on to transferring physical PII. This is some of this stuff I haven't done in more than a decade, but I'm going to talk through it. You heard Gordon talk about faxes. I'm going to talk about interoffice mail, which to me is just so far behind where I have been. I've been working at home for 15 years, so there's no interoffice mail. I barely get US mail. So let's just talk through a little bit what we do around transferring any physical PII. So do not remove your PII from facilities without approval from the appropriate party in writing. That should be part of your policy, saying if you're taking this is the process. I remember working in an office long ago and taking home client files to work at home. I probably never got authorization for that. I just did it because I needed to get done. Having a good solid policy for that is really important. If you have interoffice mail, make sure that PII is really sealed, marked well for the recipient's attention, only going within between those two facilities. So be very careful that it just isn't, putting PII out there and anyone can get their hands on it. Double wrap any envelopes sent through the Postal Service. And mark them as confidential for the recipient's attention only. Require a signature when possible from a recipient when sending PII via courier or equivalent service as well. So just really take a lot of care. Once it leaves your hands, doesn't mean you're not responsible for its protection. So keep protecting it as you transfer that physical PII on. Next slide, back to you.
Muted. Let's talk a little bit more about transmitting PII electronically. Again, fax machines, it does feel like a blast from the past here. But when faxing PII, make sure that you use date stamps, confirm the recipient's fax number beforehand, confirm that the recipient is available to receive the fax, and confirm that they actually did receive the fax. Also, and this is one that does get overlooked, and as fax machines are often used for transmitting PII, I know we're joking around, but this is actually important. Make sure that your fax machine doesn't store a record of the fax that renders the PII retrievable, such as an image of the fax. Make sure also to shred the physical copy of the transmission once you've confirmed that arrived, and whenever possible, use a fax machine with a secure transmission line, which frankly, I wouldn't even be able to tell you how you know whether it is or not. So talk to your organization's IT people. When you're emailing PII, confirm that you have the right email address, confirm receipt of the email, and whenever possible, send PII exclusively between two secure encrypted email servers. Again, talk to your organization's IT people about making sure that this is true. And just as a note, don't hit reply all. This is like the #1 PII breach thing through email. Don't hit reply all. When you're handling participant information, be really careful about who you're sending it to. If you absolutely have to send PII to an unencrypted email server, you should ensure that the PII is contained within an encrypted file attached to the email. Encrypting files is super easy nowadays. Just talk to your IT folks about how to do it. Finally, don't store PII on shared drives, calendars, your intranet, or any unsecured or publicly accessible location on the internet. And that last one, again, sounds like a forehead smacker, but here is an unsecured, publicly accessible location on the internet where I've often seen PII. Acme Community Action Agency, which is super proud of its emergency shelter program, which has a very high rate of success for getting its folks who are DV survivors from shelter into housing, post success stories with pictures and names on its Facebook page. Absolutely, positively not a secure location. Feels good, sounds like it might be a good idea. Absolutely not a good way to maintain PII. Next slide, please. Back to you, Chris.
Gordon mentioned reply all in email. Another thing that I've seen in email is you have two Chris's in your contacts and you select the wrong Chris and you send me the PII. I have had this happen to me where I see stuff I shouldn't have seen. So just kind of think about that when you're kind of hitting, adding an email and say, oh, here's Gordon, and you have 3 Gordons and you sent the PII to someone outside your organization. That's never good. So again, protecting PII, we're going to talk about record management, retention, and disposal. Do not maintain records longer than you have to by statute, by regulation, or by contract, unless there's a compelling reason to do so. So set that record retention. You see that we have a reference here for record retention for the ESG program, referred to as 24 CFR 576-500. Remind me, Gordon, is that 5 or 7 years? I get them confused because there are different standards. It is the 5-year rule for ESG, so you want to keep that in mind for this particular type of record. You don't want to go any farther than 5 years unless you have a very good reason for it, and write down that reason as well. Once you determine a record can be disposed of, destroy that record permanently. Have it shredded. There are a lot of organizations and companies that do nothing but take care of records for you. Also, electronic records should be permanently released, erased. Don't have those still hanging out on jump drives and other places that you don't want them. I do physical backup of my computer here in my house instead of using the cloud because I'm old school. If I have PII and that, I have to physically remove that. So remember, when you have both physical and electronic records, find all of the special ways to get rid of that. And if you don't know what those are for electronic stuff, talk to your IT folks. Next slide, and back to you, Gordon.
Okay, data breach response. This is a short slide, not because it's not important. It's actually arguably the second most important thing we're telling you today, other than don't let a data breach happen. It's short because we can't give you a lot of specific detail on it. It's something that you need to work out internally within your organization and have a strong policy for. A data breach means that PII has been viewed by, leaked to, or accessed by someone who is not authorized to view, access, or receive it. And that includes everything from a massive and malicious data breach, which exposes all of the data in your HMIS to the Washington Post. And I'm just picking on them because I happen to subscribe to the Washington Post. Or all the way down to the other end for you accidentally emailed the wrong Chris some PII. Both of those are data breaches. The scale of them is different, but the nature of them is not. The response will depend on the nature or severity of the breach, but in general and at minimum should involve re-securing the information. I don't know what to tell you about a major newspaper for some reason has access to your entire HMIS's records. But if you email the wrong Chris the data, you got to follow up with the wrong Chris and make sure that that data is permanently deleted. And ultimately, you need to have a policy in place that addresses the way in which you respond to data breaches of different scale. Larger organizations may have a policy for that already in place. Smaller organizations should consult with an IT professional about getting that worked out. Finally, HUD requests that ESG recipients, again, HCD, and subrecipients, e.g. y'all, report any breaches or suspected breaches of sensitive PII within the ESG program to HUD's National Help Desk at the number displayed on this card. Next slide, please. Back over to you, Chris.
All right, so the place where we see PII most in our interactions between you as subrecipients and HCD as recipients is through our reimbursement process. The HCD folks from annual ESG and our grant administrators have been very clear that we need you to redact PII. We don't want to see it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means here in the next 2 slides. But we are saying very clearly in our policy, we require you to redact all PII in your documents submitted to us unless we request otherwise, unless we say, nope, we need to see something specific. This includes, but is not limited to documents submitted as part of monitoring process, including client files. Redacted means that the PII has been permanently erased, covered, removed, so it cannot be retrieved by anyone in possession of the document. This is often accomplished by using correction fluid, correction tape, or an opaque black marker. On the next slide, I'm going to get a little bit more detailed because sometimes it looks like you redact it, and it's not redacted enough. We can still make it out, and I've seen that over and over again. So note that when you're using an opaque black marker, a single layer is often not sufficient, and instead you might want to redact that, scan it, print it again, redact it a second time, and then send that second redaction. That should remove all PII and any hint of it. You don't want even a faint bit of it. Your efforts to try to hide are great, but we really, really want that to be completely redacted. Next slide, back to you, Gordon.
Thank you. I think that might be it. I do want to lean just a little heavily on that redaction piece. It is harder than you think to redact stuff, and we're really serious about, like, you got to go over the thing with the marker a couple of times. The most effective redaction, especially when you're talking about scanning, is you got to redact the thing, scan the thing in, print it out again, and then re-redact it. And that's what finally you get rid of. The absolute most irritating thing in the world to me when I was a project monitor for ESG was receiving redacted client files that somebody had been really diligent about going through with an opaque black marker, whose maker I will not name on this call. The opaque black marker absolutely got rid of it if you were looking at it head on, but since it was written in pen, it creates this beautiful, like, chiaroscuro outline of all of the data when you scan it, and so everything was completely visible. Drove me up the wall. So just make sure that when you are redacting, that you actually look at the final product to make sure that it is actually and completely redacted. So I will pass it back over to Chris to lead us in the discussion.
So this is your time. We have now spent good 25 minutes talking about personally identifiable information, or PII. If you have questions, comments, best practices that you have deployed in your community, we're happy to hear them now. If we don't hear any conversation in a few minutes, we'll end early, but we don't talk about PII too often. So this is really your opportunity to do so. And we can also take those slides down, Aaron, to see if anyone has any things. You can come off mute, you can raise your hand, you can put something in the chat if you prefer.
PII makes people nervous, is I think what I would highlight here. Like, I'm not surprised that we are not, the chat is not blowing up today. PII makes people nervous. And I think if I were to give y'all anything to take away from today, it's that, like, as much as the subject of PII might make you nervous, it is important and valuable to take some time and review procedures to make sure that they are actually protecting your client's data. You know, what I will share is that I know any number of providers with the best of intentions who set up good policies that they fundamentally did not act on. One of them was my very first employer, and one of the employees who got chewed on by their executive director for not locking their filing cabinet was me. And that was a long time ago, but it stuck with me, obviously. And what I would highlight to that is that you can have the best policy in the world, but if your implementation isn't keeping up with it, the lockable filing cabinet is not the locked filing cabinet. You might not have a policy at all, and that's okay, but now is the time to develop one. So think about it, take some time to reflect on this, have that conversation now, because the alternative is a conversation after the PII is out of the box, and it is very hard to get that particular horse back into the barn.
And I agree, people often are a little scared of PII and disclosures and breaches. I'll just share a personal experience as part of my role as HUD technical assistant. I had high-level clearance for access to some financial data systems for HUD, and HUD had a data breach about 10 years ago, I want to say, maybe 9. My PII was lost. Thankfully, the federal government and HUD offered, credit monitoring and that kind of thing, but my names, my social security numbers, my wife's name also was part of this PII, was all lost. And there's almost no more helpless feeling because there's nothing I could have done, and there's nothing that can make it better. It's out there, it's released, and when it's gone, it's gone. It's not coming back. It's not getting lost. Whoever has it. Whenever they want to use it, they're going to use it. So it is very traumatizing to have your information lost. We don't want to perpetuate that or lose information from folks who are already in crisis and experiencing homelessness. It is injury on top of injury, not insult. It's injury on top of injury. So with that, I'm not seeing any conversation. Gordon, any last thoughts or comments before we hand it back to Taylor for the close?
Not at all. Glad to be here. Thanks for the time.
Great. Taylor, go ahead and close us out.
Thank you. Thanks for a great presentation on PII. You all managed to make that interesting and funny, which is quite the talent. So thanks everyone for being here with us. The slides and the recording will be sent out, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.